In the heart of rural Pennsylvania, there was an old, abandoned farm known as Old Maple Farm. For decades, the locals spoke in hushed tones about the eerie happenings on the property. No one dared to go there after sunset, and those who ventured close during the day often spoke of an unsettling feeling, as if they were being watched. The farm was once owned by the Maple family, who mysteriously disappeared one cold winter night in 1932. The house, barn, and fields were left as if the family had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. Livestock were found dead, crops withered, and the farmhouse quickly fell into disrepair. Years later, a man named Thomas, who was new to the area, bought the farm at a suspiciously low price. Thomas, skeptical of the local legends, was determined to restore the farm to its former glory. He moved in with his wife, Emily, and their 2 children. The first few weeks were uneventful, but as they settled in, strange things began to happen. At night, the family would hear faint whispers and footsteps echoing through the house. The children spoke of a ghostly figure they saw near the barn, a woman in old-fashioned clothes who would silently watch them before vanishing into thin air. One evening, while Thomas was working late in the barn, he heard a chilling, mournful wail. He turned to see a translucent figure of a woman, her face contorted in sorrow and anger. She pointed toward the old well at the edge of the property before disappearing. Shaken, Thomas decided to investigate the well the next morning. At dawn, Thomas, armed with a flashlight, approached the well. As he peered into the dark depths, he saw something glinting at the bottom. With great effort, he retrieved an old, rusted locket. Inside was a photo of the Maple family. Horrified, Thomas realized that this was the ghost of Mrs. Maple, and she had been trying to communicate with him. Desperate for answers, Thomas visited the local library and unearthed old newspaper articles about the Maple family. He learned that Mrs. Maple had been accused of witchcraft by her neighbors, and in a fit of panic and rage, the villagers had set fire to the farmhouse with the family inside. The well was their final resting place, where their spirits remained trapped. Determined to set things right, Thomas gathered the remains of the family and gave them a proper burial in the local cemetery. After a solemn ceremony, the disturbances ceased, and the farm finally felt at peace. Thomas and his family continued to live on Old Maple Farm, turning it into a thriving homestead once more. They would often speak of the ghosts that once haunted their home, believing that the spirits of the Maple family were finally at rest, grateful to be remembered and laid to rest with dignity. Nestled deep in the rural countryside of Virginia, Blackwood Farm was a sprawling property that had been in the Blackwood family for generations. The land was rich and fertile, known for producing bountiful harvests of corn and wheat. However, the farm also carried a dark reputation. Locals whispered about the land being cursed, but few knew the true extent of the horrors that had plagued the farm over the years. In the early 1900s, Jonathan Blackwood, the patriarch of the family, decided to expand the farm. He purchased a large tract of forested land adjacent to the farm, despite warnings from the local Native American tribe. The elders of the tribe claimed that the land was sacred and warned Jonathan that disturbing it would bring about a terrible curse. Dismissing their warnings as mere superstition, Jonathan proceeded to clear the land. From the moment the trees were felled, strange occurrences began to plague Blackwood Farm. Livestock started disappearing, only to be found days later, mutilated and arranged in strange, ritualistic patterns. Crops withered overnight, and the once vibrant soil turned dry and barren. The farmhands reported hearing eerie chants and seeing shadowy figures moving through the fields at night. Jonathan's youngest daughter, Emily, was the first to see the watcher. She described a tall, gaunt figure with hollow eyes that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Despite her pleas, Jonathan refused to believe in the supernatural, attributing the sightings to overactive imaginations and the stress of hard work. One fateful night, as a violent storm raged outside, Emily vanished from her bedroom. The family searched frantically, but she was nowhere to be found. The following morning, they discovered her lifeless body at the edge of the forest, her eyes wide open in terror, and her skin ice cold. Clutched in her hand was a small, carved figure resembling the Watcher. Grief-stricken and desperate for answers, Jonathan turned to the tribe's elders for help. They reluctantly agreed to perform a cleansing ritual to lift the curse, but warned Jonathan that the price would be steep. During the ritual, the elders chanted ancient incantations and made offerings to the spirits. As the ceremony reached its climax, a violent gust of wind extinguished the flames of the bonfire, and the Watcher appeared at the edge of the clearing. The elders confronted the Watcher, demanding it release its hold on the farm. The Watcher spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of the earth, revealing that it was the guardian of the land, angered by the desecration of the sacred forest. To break the curse, the Watcher demanded a blood sacrifice, the life of the one who had disturbed the land. Realizing the gravity of his actions, Jonathan stepped forward, offering himself as the sacrifice. As the Watcher accepted, Jonathan's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless. The wind died down, and a heavy silence fell over the farm. The elders completed the ritual, and the Watcher faded into the darkness. With Jonathan's sacrifice, the curse was lifted. The soil slowly regained its fertility, and the crops began to thrive once more. However, the family could never forget the price they had paid. Emily and Jonathan were buried together under the old oak tree at the edge of the farm, their graves marked with simple stones. Years passed, and Blackwood Farm became prosperous again. The story of the Watcher and the curse became a cautionary tale, passed down through generations. The Blackwood family learned to respect the land and the spirits that watched over it. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the trees, they could still feel the presence of the Watcher, a reminder of the consequences of disturbing the balance of nature. Hollow Oak Farm had always been an eerie place, shrouded in mystery and foreboding. Nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, the farm was isolated from the nearby town of Willow Creek. For generations, the Holloway family had lived there, tending to the land and keeping to themselves. The locals often spoke in hushed tones about the strange occurrences on the farm, but no one dared to venture too close. The farm was named after a massive, ancient oak tree that stood at the center of the property. The tree was hollow, its interior large enough for a grown man to stand inside. Legend had it that the tree was cursed, and that it held the restless spirits of those who had wronged the land. In the early 1900s, James Holloway inherited the farm from his father. Determined to modernize the farm and increase its productivity, he began clearing the surrounding forest and expanding the fields. As he worked, he discovered a hidden cave near the base of the hollow oak tree. Inside, he found strange carvings on the walls and a collection of old, dusty books filled with arcane symbols and incantations. James was a pragmatic man, but curiosity got the better of him. He began to study the books, fascinated by the promise of ancient knowledge and power. He performed small rituals, testing the spells and summoning minor spirits to aid him in his work. At first, it seemed harmless enough. The spirits helped him clear the land and protect his crops from pests and disease. But as time went on, James grew bolder. He performed more complex rituals, calling forth stronger and darker entities. His success came at a cost. The spirits demanded offerings, and James began sacrificing small animals to appease them. His wife, Margaret, grew increasingly worried about his obsession, but James assured her that everything was under control. One night, during a particularly intense storm, James performed a ritual to summon a powerful spirit that he believed could grant him immense wealth and power. As he chanted the incantations, the wind howled, and the storm intensified. Lightning struck the hollow oak tree, splitting it open and releasing a dark, malevolent force that had been trapped inside. The spirit, known as Malachai, was a vengeful entity that thrived on pain and suffering. It took control of James, twisting his mind and turning him against his family. Under Malachai's influence, James became increasingly violent and erratic. He terrorized his wife and children, forcing them to participate in his dark rituals. Margaret, fearing for the safety of her children, sought help from the local priest, Father O'Malley. The priest, a kind and brave man, agreed to perform an exorcism to rid James of the evil spirit. He and Margaret gathered a small group of townsfolk and made their way to Hollow Oak Farm. As they arrived, they were met with a horrifying sight. The farm was overrun with dark, shadowy figures, and the once fertile land had turned barren and lifeless. The hollow oak tree stood at the center, its gaping maw emanating an otherworldly light. James stood before the tree, chanting in a language none of them understood. Father O'Malley stepped forward, holding his crucifix aloft. He began to recite prayers, calling upon the power of God to banish the evil spirit. Malachai shrieked in rage, and the shadows converged on the priest. The townsfolk fought bravely, but they were no match for the dark forces at play. Just as all seemed lost, Margaret stepped forward, holding one of the ancient books she had taken from James's study. She began to recite a counter-incantation she had found within its pages, her voice steady and unwavering. As she spoke, the dark forces recoiled, and the light from the tree began to dim. Malachai, sensing his imminent defeat, lashed out at Margaret, but Father O'Malley intervened, using his crucifix to drive the spirit back. With a final, agonized scream, Malachai was banished back to the depths from which he had come. The shadows dissipated, and James collapsed to the ground, free from the spirit's control. The farm, however, was forever changed. The land remained barren, and the hollow oak tree stood as a grim reminder of the horrors that had taken place. The Holloway family left the farm, unable to bear the memories of what had happened. They moved to a nearby town, hoping to rebuild their lives and find some semblance of peace. Hollow Oak Farm was abandoned, left to the elements and the whispers of the past. Locals avoided the area, and the story of James Holloway and the cursed tree became a cautionary tale, warning of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. And on stormy nights, when the wind howled through the mountains, some claimed they could still hear the faint echoes of James's chants and the malevolent laughter of Malachai, reminding all who heard it that some secrets are best left undisturbed.